First, probably everybody in here can associate with learning from your mistakes. You probably had some mistakes that really made a difference in your life. On the other hand, however, I suspect everybody in here has not learned from some of your mistakes. Have you done something and said, ooh, I've done that before, ooh, I've done that before, and I wish I hadn't done that before. And the reason we don't learn from our mistakes, in order to learn from a mistake, we not only have to admit we made one, we have to admit the deepest psychological cause of that mistake, the real reason we made that mistake. And unfortunately, sometimes we evade, and when you evade, you can't learn from your mistakes. Superior experiential learners evade less and learn far more rapidly than other people do. The second thing superior experiential learners do is recognize that life is a constant education if you choose to make it one. You can sit around at a table at lunch like this and have a very interesting educational conversation or not. Over the years, I visited all BB&T's community banks, and I got to have luncheons like this with our local advisory board members who are business and community leaders. And it was always an educational experience for me, and I think for them. You could see why those people were leaders, why they were successful in their business, because they were always popping questions, providing feedback. It was a very interesting, engaged process. So they had a very active mind. Unfortunately, a lot of people live their lives out of focus, and when you're out of focus, you can't learn. And life is a constant education if you choose to make it one. Some successful business leaders have superior IQs. I don't think that's necessarily typical. What I find about the most successful business leaders, they evade less and stay in focus more, which is a huge competitive advantage in life. Our third value is independent thinking. Independent thinking means thinking for yourself from the facts of reality. Independent thinking is important because it makes two things both necessary and possible: responsibility and creativity. The most important meta-psychological decision you can make is to choose to be responsible for yourself. If you view yourself as a victim, then somebody else has to change to make you happy, and you can't change anybody else. You can't change anybody else. Some people view themselves as a victim because of their race, their sex, their nationality. Most common reason that people view themselves as a victim is because of their mother. If I just had a different mother, that'd be great, right? I want to share with you a thought that everybody here already knows, but you probably don't like to think about, and that is, at least at the level of consciousness, we're all alone. At least the level of consciousness, we're all alone. Sorry, that's just the way it is. Because of that, only you can be responsible for you. It is not possible for anybody else to be responsible for you. Only you can be responsible for you. Classic parental error, classic managerial error. The flip of that's also true. You cannot be responsible for anybody else. You cannot be responsible for your children. If you try to be responsible for your children, you'll set your children up to fail. You are absolutely responsible to do your best to teach your children to be responsible for themselves, but you can't be responsible for your children. Classic managerial error. See this a lot in young managers. You cannot be responsible for the people that work for you. If you try to be responsible for the people that work for you, you're going to set them up and you up to fail. You are responsible to do your absolute best to teach the people that work for you to be responsible for themselves. If they refuse to learn, get you a new employee, because you can't have somebody that's not responsible. Interesting thing about responsibility, groups like this, in terms of success, everybody's responsible or you wouldn't be in this room today. This is a highly successful group of people. You wouldn't be here if you weren't responsible for your success. What I find interesting, however, is in groups like this, many successful people aren't responsible for their happiness, and only you can make you happy. Creativity. All human progress by definition is based on creativity. And so, unless somebody does something better, which by definition will be different, there cannot be any progress. Creativity is only possible to an independent thinker. Somebody that thinks like the crowd, cannot be innovative, cannot be creative, cannot contribute to human progress. That's why entrepreneurs, I'm glad we were recognizing entrepreneurs, that's why entrepreneurs are so essential to human well-being. It's why free markets really work. Free markets create an environment where people can be innovative and creative, and it's a fundamental aspect of our nature as human beings. So creativity is incredibly important. If you look at the obstacles to creativity, the fundamental obstacle is the belief that creativity is magical, that somehow it just happens magically. Not so. Creativity is an intellectual activity. There's nothing mystical or magical about creativity. It's an intellectual activity. It is true that a lot of creativity takes place in the subconscious, But most of your thinking takes place in the subconscious. To give you an analogy, it's not a perfect analogy, but it's a decent analogy. You're the computer program. You wrote the programs that are running in your subconscious. You might not be aware of them, but you wrote those programs. You can change them, but they run on automatic when you don't change them. And that's a lot of how your thinking takes place. 95% of your thinking probably takes place in the subconscious. Creativity is the same way, but it is an intellectual activity. If you look at people that are superior in terms of being creativity, they have two interesting attributes. One, they believe they're capable of being creative, and two, they believe it's important to be creative. The fourth value is productivity. Productivity exists on two planes. In a free market, profit is a good thing. It's simply the difference between the value of what we create and the cost of creating it. The bigger the difference, the better. To be highly profitable, an organization must be very productive. It must be very efficient. At the individual level, productivity is that gut level commitment to get the job done. I believe there's a fundamental psychological difference between non-performers and high performers. Non-performers look for the ways to fail, and high performers have that gut level commitment to get the job done. Over the years, I've had the experience of visiting lots of our branches, visiting lots of our home office functions, and I use a branch as a simple example. And I might be visiting one of the branches where things aren't going too well. And the branch manager will always have a story. And the story is, those competitors across the street are charging too low a rates on loans, paying too high a rates on deposits. That stoplight keeps people from getting into my branch. Or, if those people in the home office would fix the computer system, everything would be okay. Sometimes there's some truth to that. Sometimes there are obstacles that make it impossible for people to accomplish a job. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes we change branch managers and everything gets okay. Sometimes we do that. I compare that with our Sterling Award winners, our most productive employees. One interesting thing about it, there's about 4,000 people that are qualified to be in that Sterling Award program. There's only 2 or 3 people that win it every year. But the same 25% tend to win it. They may win 1 year, maybe 2 or 3 years before they come back. But that same 25% tend to win that Sterling Award. And if you talk to Sterling Award winners, they not only talk about what they did, but how much more they're going to do. They face the same obstacles, but they're really focused on the end. Non-performers look for the reasons to fail. High performers have that gut level commitment to get the job done. And we're looking for those kind of productive people. Our fifth value is honesty. Honesty is a foundational value. Without it, nothing else follows. There's no trust. There's no relationship with honesty. If you look at most of the ethical deviations that we've seen in society, they're around honesty. And being dishonest is by definition, being detached from reality is a bad place to be. It's interesting to think about the standard of honesty. A lot of people think that in order to be honest, you have to be right. The interesting thing is you can be honest and be wrong, because as human beings, we're not omniscient. But there is a very rigorous standard of honesty. And that rigorous standard is we must mean what we say and know what we mean. We must mean what we say and know what we mean. Mean what we say means you don't go out and intentionally mislead people. I doubt there's anybody in this room that does that or does it very often. If you do it, you will eventually get selected out. I was particularly focused on the students in that regard. You'll get in serious trouble. It's a little trickier thing, though, in terms of meaning what we say at the micro level. I do find a lot of people tell white lies, often with rationalizations. The only problem is the cumulative effect of white lies is a black lie. You see that a lot in management. A manager will tell you about some of the weaknesses in somebody that's working for them, but then when they have the performance appraisal with that employee, they don't tell them the truth. They give them some kind of sugarcoating. And then they get mad at the employee because the employee didn't hear what they didn't say. You see that in spousal relationships, right? We have these little white lie games, and then sometimes we create huge frictions over those little white lies, well-intended white lies. Honesty demands that we say what we mean. The cumulative effect of white lies is a black lies. Know what we mean. As human beings, we're not omniscient, but the standard here is we don't claim a level of knowledge we don't have. You can't get into arguments with people and then make up some facts to win your argument, and you see that fairly often. We don't claim a level of knowledge we don't have. That is a form of dishonesty. The most fundamental expression of honesty is we have to keep our agreements. We must keep our agreements. Our sixth value is integrity. There are a lot of apparent temptations in life. In my business, when you work with money, there are a lot of apparent temptations in life. However, what you can know, if you've developed your values, your principles based on the facts, those temptations aren't really temptations. They're just ways to fail. They're just ways to fail. Really, integrity is about the harmony of mind and body. It says if you believe something, do it. If you believe something, do it. It's interesting to think about integrity, because a lot of people view integrity as some kind of duty. I gotta have integrity. Not so. Integrity is a means to success and happiness, because if you develop your principles logically, you want to act consistent with those principles. But unfortunately, a lot of people haven't developed their principles, they don't have principles, or their principles are inconsistent. So if whether you agree or disagree with what I say, you need to have an integrated value system, or you can't act with integrity. You can't act consistent with your principles if they are not consistent with one another. What's interesting about integrity, while it's not a duty, it does have a requirement. It's a requirement that worries me a lot in our society. Integrity does require that you take a long-term perspective on your life. There are many things that in the short run seem good that will really come around to haunt you in the long term. We see that often in politics. We're seeing it in grand spades right now. A lot of things that sound good in the short term will kill you in the long term. Integrity is not a duty. It's a means to success and happiness, but it does require a long-term perspective. And it does also what you can know with certainty. If you develop your principles logically, you never want to compromise your principles. There are lots of compromises around the content of life, but never compromise the context. Our seventh value is justice or fairness. In human relationships, justice is the number one value. You ask somebody what they think about their manager, pretty soon they're going to say, well, I think my manager's fair, just, or not. And people don't want to work for somebody that under-rewards performance, or interesting enough, somebody that over-rewards performance, and they're right to feel that way. If there's no reward for superior performance, the best people will leave and we'll be worse off. Equally important, if there's no reward for superior performance, the average person won't be motivated to do better. And a lot of leadership and a lot of management is about getting average people to perform at above average rates. At BB&T, we strongly believe that those that contribute the most should receive them. We have incentive systems that are designed in that regard. They're not perfect. Measuring performance is a difficult task, but our goal is clear. We want those that contribute the most to receive the most. For that reason, we consciously reject egalitarianism. In fact, I would argue that egalitarianism is one of the most destructive ideas in our society today. What egalitarians want is not equal opportunity, they want equal outcome. It is true that everybody ought to be equal before the law. It is true that everybody should be treated with dignity and respect because they're a human being. But it is not true that everybody is equal. In fact, I've never met two equal people. Every person in this room is unique, is special. We're all unique, special human beings. And that's good news. We're all unique, special human beings. At the extreme, Thomas Edison and the Boston Strangler are not equal. They are not equal. Because people are not equal, we do have to judge. We do have to evaluate other people. We have to judge a lot of things. Are we eating the right food? We're wearing the right clothes? Are we working for the right people? The right people are working for us? Do our children have the right kind of friends? Are we marrying the right person? We have to evaluate people. In fact, I would argue management, one of the most important things you do is judge and evaluate other people. Because people are different. They are not equal. So we do have to judge. We do have to evaluate people. And it's very important that we do it, and it's very important that we do it right. Because there's a proper method of evaluating, judging other people. We have to judge people as individuals, based on their merits, based on what matters in that circumstance. So we do judge people, but as individuals, based on their merits, based on what matters in that circumstance. For that reason, we consciously reject collectivism. Collectivists evaluate people by their membership in a group. Forms of collectivism include racism, sexism, communism, nationalism, socialism are all forms of collectivism. One interesting thing about collectivism, they're always wrong because everybody in a group is always different. In business, the most common forms of collectivism you see are racism and sexism. We made some progress on racism and sexism, but we still have a lot of races and sexes in business. And it's interesting to reflect on what motivates racists and sexists. I fundamentally believe it's low self-esteem. You know, I'm not too good, but my group's better than your group. What racists and sexists don't realize, it goes to a very general principle, is that when you evaluate people for the wrong reason, bad things happen to you. So if we have a financial center manager, a branch manager that doesn't hire the best person to do the job because that person's black, white, male, female, Chinese, any other non-essential reason, what's going to happen? That branch is going to be less successful than it would have been. If she continues that pattern, eventually that branch will be so unsuccessful she'll get fired. So being a racist or sexist is bad for the person being discriminated against, but it's also bad for the person doing the discrimination. And this is the general principle. Our means of survival, success, and happiness is our capacity to think rationally. The most important arena for most of us in which we need to think rationally is our evaluation of other people. When we judge other people for the wrong reasons, bad things happen to us. Racism and sexism is kind of obvious because there's been a lot of discussion of it, but there are lots of other more subtle reasons. If you judge somebody because of how much hair they have or what their weight is, if you decide to marry somebody because they're good looking instead of their character, bad things can happen to you. Bad things can happen. So you do have to evaluate other people, but you need to do it right. And it's a very important part of making your kind of judgments. A couple other thoughts about justice. Justice is a two-edged sword. You do have to reward superior performance, and I find that most people will deal with that. However, a lot of people don't want to deal with the other edge of the sword, dealing with non-performance. Failing to deal with non-performance is a form of injustice, And it's an injustice for two reasons. First, it's unfair to the team because non-performers hurt the team, but it's also unfair to the non-performer. I've never met a happy non-performer. Justice requires that we deal with non-performance. One other thought about justice. Justice only applies to human action. Mother Nature is neither just nor unjust. Mother Nature just is. And a lot of people spend a lot of effort and energy kind of cursing Mother Nature. It's a waste of time. Mother Nature just is. Our eighth value is pride. Aristotle said that pride was the greatest of all virtues because to have it, you had to have all the others. You had to be just, honest, have integrity, be a rational, independent thinker. As such, pride serves two roles. It's a psychological reminder to do good and a psychological rewarder for having done good. I want to give you all a test, and particularly I focus this on the young people. The next time that you have to make a moral decision, which is far more often than you think, ask yourself this question. Would you be willing to tell the people that you care about what you're going to do, and more importantly, why you're going to do it? If you wouldn't tell the people that you care about, not the newspaper, but the people that you've evaluated important in your life, what you're going to do and why you're going to do it, don't do it. Don't do it. Because you will always know what you did, and you will always know why you did it. And you want to be able to be proud of you. Our ninth value is self-esteem and self-motivation. At higher levels in organizations and for groups like this, I would argue this is the number one value. I see this fairly often where people that have reached high levels in organizations that are plenty smart enough, have great educational backgrounds, make some serious mistake. And it classically reflects some kind of subconscious self-destructive belief they have that results in self-destructive activity. So self-esteem is a huge driver in terms of performance. At a deeper level, however, self-esteem is the foundation for happiness, and happiness is the end of the game. You know, a lot of people get enamored, particularly in business, get enamored with money. Money's fine, but money has no end in itself. The end is happiness in the broadest, longest term sense of the word. And self-esteem is the foundation for happiness. So self-esteem is incredibly important. Yet most people have it backwards. 4 thoughts about self-esteem. 1, self-esteem is primarily a reflection of self-confidence in your ability to live and be successful given the facts of reality. So self-esteem is earned by how you live your life. Nobody can give you self-esteem. You cannot give anybody self-esteem. You cannot give your children self-esteem. It has to be earned. Promote children that haven't mastered a grade, lower their self-esteem. Live your life with integrity, raise your self-esteem. Second thought about self-esteem, which I think is the most important thought I have today and probably the most controversial. I'm sure it's the most controversial one. In order to have a high level of self-esteem, you must believe at a very deep level that you're capable of being good and that you have the moral right to be happy. In order to have a high level of self-esteem, you must believe at a very deep level that you're capable of being good and that you have the moral right to be happy. One of the most commonly held beliefs in our society, probably everybody in this room has some of it, is that as human beings we're born bad, right? And the reason we're bad is we're selfish, and selfish is bad. Johnny in the sandbox, 4 years old, having a good time, playing with his truck, not bothering anybody. Along comes Fred. Fred would like to have Johnny's truck. Johnny doesn't want to give him a truck. This fight, argument ensues. Mom, dad, Sunday school teacher, kindergarten teacher interferes in that fight and Mom says, "Hey, Johnny, give Fred that truck. Don't be bad. Don't be selfish. Don't be selfish. Don't be bad." Interesting message. First, what's the message to Fred? Where did Fred get the right to Johnny's truck? That's your social welfare system right there in the sandbox, right? That's it. That's the whole social welfare system, 4 years old in the sandbox. What about the message to Johnny? What if Johnny hears that several hundred times between the time he's 2 and 10? Or if he's female, he gets to hear it 5 times as many times. What's the message to Johnny? Interesting thing. It says, don't be selfish, don't be bad. Immutable, non-negotiable fact of reality. Everything that is alive must act in its self-interest or die. Immutable, non-negotiable fact of reality. Everything that is alive must act in its self-interest or die. That's how Mother Nature designed the system. A lion has to hunt or starve. A deer has to run from the hunter or be eaten. Thank you. Trees shade out other trees to get sunlight. Amoeba take chemicals that other amoeba would like to have. Life is by definition self-sustaining action. Anything that's alive that quits sustaining its life dies. That's how Mother Nature designed the system. That's simply the way it is. To say that man is bad because he's selfish is the same thing as saying we're bad because we're alive. That's how Mother Nature designed the system. Now, it's very important that we define selfish properly. And I'm going to define it as acting in one's rational, long-term self-interest. One's rational, long-term self-interest. Because we get a classic false dichotomy. And the false dichotomy is to take advantage of other people or self-sacrifice. Neither one of which make any sense. A lot of times when people talk about selfish, they say, well, it's really about taking advantage of other people. Here's an interesting irony. Taking advantage of other people is not selfish, it's self-defeating. Taking advantage of other people is not selfish, it's self-defeating. It's self-defeating for 2 reasons, one practical, the other psychological. You know, I might fool Fred, and I might fool Tom, and I might fool Jane, but pretty soon Fred, Tom, and Jane are going to tell Dick and Harry, and nobody's going to trust me. You see that in business all the time. Probably those of you in college see that. People you don't trust. And that it doesn't work when people don't trust you. Taking advantage of other people leads to a lack of trust in you. The other thing about taking advantage of other people that's a lot deeper, it is very psychologically destructive. If you go out trying to manipulate other people's consciousness, bad things are going to happen to your consciousness. You're going to end up being paranoid. I see this in business. I get to meet lots of, quote, successful people in my role. I met lots of successful people. Interesting observation. I've never met anybody that I have found to be both successful and happy that I think got there taking advantage of other people. Now, I've met some people that made a lot of money taking advantage of other people, and they're the most unhappy people I have ever met. Unhappy people. Other people's consciousness do exist in reality, and you have to be aware of those consciousness. But if you let go of reality in order to manipulate other people's mind, bad things are going to happen to you. So taking advantage of other people is not selfish, it is self-defeating. How about self-sacrifice? That's the most common. We're all supposed to be self-sacrificial, right? I want to ask you one really fundamental question. Really fundamental, and I particularly would like for the university students to reflect on this question. Don't you have as much right to your life as anybody else? Don't you have as much right to your life as anybody else? Why would you believe anything different? Why would you believe anything different? Self-sacrifice carried to the logical extreme is called altruism. To understand things philosophically, you have to take it to the logical extreme. Altruism is a philosophically self-defeating idea because it says you have to take things to the lowest common denominator. So if I have anything more than Jane, I'm obligated to give it to Jane. But even though Jane is poor, if she has anything more than Sue, she's obligated to give it to Sue. And even though Sue's really poor, if she has anything more than Tom, she's obligated to give it to Tom down to the lowest common denominator. Unfortunately, there are always people in the process of dying. And the only way to be equal to somebody that is dying is to die yourself. We don't have good altruists today. The monks in the Middle Ages, they were really good altruists. They beat themselves with whips, drank dirty dishwater, slept on rocks. They were good altruists. Not a great way to live. Taking advantage of other people nor self-sacrifice makes sense. What we really are in life is we're traders. We trade value for value. We get better together. In our business, we help our clients achieve economic success and financial security. They let us make a profit doing it. We get better together. In fact, life is really about creating win-win relationships. There are only two stable relationship conditions, win-win and lose-lose. Whenever we get greedy, you see this sometimes in spousal relationships, and try to set up a win-lose relationship, inevitably it becomes lose-lose. Whenever, interestingly enough, anytime we get self-sacrificial and set up a lose-win relationship, we get bitter, and we end up with a lose-lose relationship. Life is about creating win-win relationships. In any important relationship in your life, the first question you should ask is, what's in it for me? Because if there's nothing in it for you, you will tank that relationship. But you should also ask, what's in it for them? What's in it for them? Because if there's nothing in it for them, they'll tank the relationship and it won't work for you. So life is really about creating win-win relationships. Of course, it is in your rational self-interest to help your family, your friends, the people you work with, the people you care about, because you care about them. If you love your children, helping your children is not a sacrifice because you love your children. In fact, love is the ultimate expression of selfishness. Now, most people don't think of that way, but I'll target this at our students here. You're getting ready to get married, and you're really excited about getting married, and your spouse comes up to you, your future spouse comes up to you and says, honey, I'm so excited about marrying you. This is the biggest self-sacrifice I've ever made. Not exactly what you want to hear, right? Not exactly. Love is an expression of selfishness. I happen to believe it is in my rational self-interest to support the United Way and the March of Dimes, organizations that make our community a better place to live. I wouldn't want to live in the kind of communities that would exist without those organizations, and I sure wouldn't want my children to live there. BB&T is a huge contributor to colleges and universities because we believe having an educated workforce is vital to the long-term health and success of our business. I would personally be willing to risk my life to defend freedom because I wouldn't want to live in a society that wasn't free. All of those things I view in my rational self-interest. A lot of times when people talk about rational self-interest, they have this tunnel view, but it's much bigger than that. It's asking yourself, what context would you like to live in? How would you like this world to be? And doing what you can to create that kind of environment. And that is in your rational self-interest. In that context, we should be selfish. And you're not bad because you're selfish. You're alive because you're selfish. One of the great philosophical observations in the history of man was expressed by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Most people, when they hear that, think about liberty, and liberty is very important, but it's an old idea. It's a Greek idea. The new idea, the world-changing idea, was the pursuit of happiness. Before Jefferson, before the thinkers of the Enlightenment, everybody existed for somebody else's good. The good of the king, the good of the state, the good of the church. Nobody existed for their own good. What Jefferson said is each of us has the moral right to the pursuit of our personal happiness. We're not guaranteed success in that pursuit, but we have that right. That's the world-changing idea that created the most successful society in history and, interestingly enough, the most benevolent. When people have the right to their own life, they're naturally nicer to other people. In socialist and communist societies, everybody hates each other because they're all enslaved to each other. And I agree with Jefferson. I agree that each of us has a moral right to the pursuit of our personal happiness. If you don't believe at a very deep level that you're capable of being good and that you have the moral right to the pursuit of your personal happiness, you cannot have a high level of self-esteem. Third thought about self-esteem, just like you ought to be evaluating other people, you always ought to be evaluating yourself. You ought to be asking yourself, am I who I want to be? Am I moving in the right direction? You should be self-evaluating. I'll tell you a little story. One of my heroes is Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was not only a great basketball player, but he was a real inspiration to poor people, I think. This will surprise you, but I'm not as good a basketball player as Michael Jordan. There's a serious deviation in performance. Should I feel bad about me because I'm not as good a basketball player as Michael Jordan? No. Just like mankind is born with a nature, each of us individually is born with a concrete set of strengths and weaknesses. And all we can do is the best we can do given our nature. And interestingly enough, all that requires is you do something productive that you enjoy doing, and you do it the best you can do it. If you do something productive that you enjoy doing and you do it the best you can do it, you're perfect. People say perfection is impossible. It's impossible, it ain't perfect. Perfection is the best possible, and you can be perfect and get better because it's contextual. You can learn, you can grow. If you're not doing something productive, you're not doing something you enjoy doing, do something different. If you're doing something productive you enjoy doing it, but you're not doing the best you can do it better. You can make two errors in self-evaluation. One error is when you think you're better than you are. That's arrogance. Very destructive place to be. Usually means low self-esteem leads to arrogance. Never lend money to arrogant people. If you've ever gotten feedback that you're arrogant, watch it. You'll eventually make a bad mistake. However, I find in groups like this, there's almost nobody that's arrogant. That's very atypical of groups like this. What I find is probably almost everybody in this group makes the opposite of that mistake. I find that highly successful, this group's in the top 5%, top 2% of the people on the planet, or you wouldn't be in this room. I find in groups like this, most people under-evaluate objectively what they've achieved. And I can tell you why. In that sandbox, you learned it was bad to be selfish, and you couldn't be here if you hadn't been selfish. So a lot of people at a subconscious level punish themselves irrationally, and they don't feel as good about themselves as they objectively should feel. Final thought about self-esteem. In the real world, self-esteem primarily comes from romantic love and productive work. Romantic love is the survival of the species need. I'm certainly not an expert on romantic love, but I have one thought. If you're looking for somebody else to make you happy, if you expect your spouse to make you happy, you are guaranteed to fail. If you're looking for somebody to share your happiness with, you have a very high probability of success, because there's a lot of people looking for somebody to share happiness with. Productive work. As human beings, we survive by production. Raising children is very hard, very productive work. We survive by production. Productive work for I'd say for practically everybody in this room, is the single biggest driver of your self-esteem, because that's where you spend your effort and energy. So work is far more important than money. It's a lot about who you are as a human being. Something I say to all the employees of BB&T, it's real important to BB&T you do your job well, but it's far, far, far more important to you. Might fool me about how well you do your job, might fool your boss about how well you do your job, but you'll never fool you. If you don't do your work the best you can possibly do it, given your level of skill and knowledge, you can't do the impossible, you will lower your self-esteem. By the way, that's true for the students here. If you don't pursue your college career, which is your work, the best you can possibly do it, it's a lot more important than the grades you get or whether you get a job afterwards. If you don't pursue your work the best you can possibly do it, you will lower your self-esteem. That's how the system is designed. Here's the good news. The flip of that's also true. Do your work the best you can possibly do it. Given your level of knowledge, given your level of skill, you can't do the impossible, and you will raise your self-esteem. And in business, that's a lot more important than whether you get money or whether you get some kind of promotion, because it has a lot to do with who you are. Work is a big driver of character, which is what really makes work important. One integrating thought and why I think egalitarianism is so destructive goes to that story of Michael Jordan. I'm not as good a basketball player as Michael Jordan. I don't care how hard I tried, how hard you tried to help me. I cannot be as good a basketball player as Michael Jordan. It's not possible. You cannot make the average great. You can make the average better. That may be a very productive, very noble thing to do, but you cannot make the average great. You cannot make me as good a basketball player as Michael Jordan. However, you can make the great average. Egalitarians, by definition, have to be in the business of making the great average. That's the only way to make people equal. It's very easy to make Michael Jordan as good a basketball player as me. Cut his legs off. Maybe a hand. I'm not sure where the line is to make him as good a basketball player as me. Oh, we wouldn't do that to Michael Jordan. I don't know. We've been tough on great people. We poisoned Socrates, imprisoned Galileo, burned Joan of Arc. Now we do it much more sophisticated manner. We do it with balls and chains. 1% of the taxpayers pay 25% of the taxes, 5% pay 50%. 50% of the taxpayers pay no taxes. It's a great way to run a democracy. We do it lots of mind-numbing rules and regulations. Very interesting thing. Great people make a disproportionate contribution to human well-being. When we put balls and chains on great people, bad things happen to us. Thomas Edison not only invented the light bulb, he invented electrical generation, he invented the research laboratory itself. When you put balls and chains on the Thomas Edisons, it reduces the quality of life for all of us. Great people make a disproportionate contribution to human well-being. It's very interesting. Egalitarians like to claim the moral high ground because, hey, who can argue about everybody being equal? Unfortunately, what I think motivates egalitarians is the most destructive of all human emotions, and watch it in yourself. It's called envy. Envy. Hatred of the good for being the good. Very destructive emotion. Our 10th value is teamwork and mutual supportiveness. We want people that think for themselves, they have strong personal goals, but recognizing in the organizational setting we're in it together. And that requires that we do three basic things. First, we have to do our job well. Most common reason people fail teams, they don't do their job well. Probably, I know in a college setting, you'd be put in an arbitrary group of 5 people and one person wouldn't do their job. That's failing the team. The second thing is you have to root for your fellow teammates to be successful. There's an old saying in the South, lie down with dogs, get fleas. The flip of that's true. Spend time with great people, get great. Try to find people that do stuff better than you and learn from those people and root for them to be even more successful. And by the way, one of the main reasons that we root against our teammates, and we do this a lot, whether we like to admit it or not, is because of what? Envy. And that envy is a very destructive emotion. Instead, focus on great people, get great. Not for them, by the way, for you. Support your fellow teammates for yourself. Third aspect of teamwork that a lot of people miss is an intellectual activity. You need to think about how your work impacts the rest of the team. Simple example, we have a branch manager. She has to do her job well, but she has to think about how her work impacts the tellers. How does it impact the relationship bankers? Is she filling in the expense voucher right so somebody in the home office doesn't have to fix that expense voucher? How does your work affect the rest of the team? Those are our 10 core values at BB&T. If you think about those 10 values, not only are they non-contradictory, they're integrated. Fail on one, fail on all the others. If you're dishonest, you're disconnected from reality, can't be just, etc., etc. I would also argue that this value system is comprehensive. There are lots of other positive attributes, but I think they fit into this value system. For example, courage is a positive attribute, but courage is simply a reflection of integrity. If you have integrity, you're going to have courage. Trustworthiness is a positive attribute. It's simply a reflection of honesty. The reasons that's important goes back to this idea of concept formation. In 10 ideas, you can dramatically improve your capacity to make decisions that improve the quality of your life. And the more that you can hold in one concept, the more effective your thinking process is. A couple other quick thoughts. A lot of times when you talk about reason, people say, well, that means you don't think emotions matter. Not so. Emotions matter a lot. They're not going away. They're part of who you are as a human being. However, a lot of people have emotions wrong in this sense that emotions are not automatically built into the system. They're really a form of primitive values. And when you were young, you saw somebody you liked, you saw somebody like them you liked, you said, I'm going to like that kind of person. You did something you liked, you did something like it, you liked something like that kind of event, and you develop these automated responses, which are helpful guides to actions. However, I've never met anybody that didn't have some dysfunctional emotions, particularly emotions that took them in the wrong directions. And a couple thought about emotions. Emotions are learned, or we'd all have the same emotions. There's nothing magical, there's nothing mystical about emotions. They're learned behaviors. And because emotions are learned, you can change your emotions. Changing emotions is very hard. It requires a lot of courage, a lot of introspection, but you can change your emotions. And it's a very high payback activity. Several members of our executive management team have significantly changed their emotions and dramatically improved their performance. And of course, what you want to do is be happy when you should be happy, be unhappy when you should be unhappy. A lot of people want to get rid of emotions. They don't ever want to be unhappy. There are times objectively you should be unhappy. But what you want to avoid is the curse of successful people, which is being unhappy when you should be happy. One last thought about emotions. Emotions are not a means of knowledge. In any conflict between reason and emotion, always pick reason, because emotions are just reasons you had when you were much younger. And that's really important for a group like this, because most of the time your reasons and emotions are going to line up, and when they don't, it's a red flag. And the first thing you should ask yourself, am I thinking properly? Am I thought about this properly? But if you are, go by your reason, not your emotions. I know when I was in college, I had several times when my brain told me not to do something, and my emotions told me to do it, and I went ahead and did it. I'm still sorry 30 years later about that. I look at some of the largest corporations in America that have had economic problems or challenges run by very bright, highly educated people. I guarantee that some of them were driven by emotions in their decision that caused them to get into serious financial trouble. In any conflict between reason and emotion, pick reason. Final thought, at BB&T, we're strongly committed in creating a knowledge-based learning organization. We believe that superior competitive advantage is in the minds of our employees. We also believe in systematized learning in the sense that people habituate successful behaviors. They have to learn and support those kind of behaviors. We're fundamentally committed in creating an organization based on principles. We believe that having the right principles, more than any great strategies or any grand vision, but having the right fundamental principles is the foundation for organizational success and also the foundation for success for our individual employees. And it creates the opportunity for our employees that choose to be very happy in their work. I know we have a number of people in here that are already principled leaders, and I know we have some young people that will be principled leaders. Quality of leadership matters. It has a profound impact on the quality of life individually and the quality of life in our society. Thank you very much.
Don't go too far away. President Kennedy once noted at a dinner that he held for Nobel Poet Laureates that a previous conglomeration of great ability and knowledge had not previously had dinner in the White House since Thomas Jefferson ate alone. I very much feel I've had a Jeffersonian experience this afternoon, and I'm very appreciative to John for being here and for the support that he's certainly given to the way he has led his life. More than 50 colleges now have essentially received beneficence from the foundation at BB&T. Most recently this morning, the Citadel. We're very appreciative, I will say, on behalf of the Citadel, if I might. I hope Sam doesn't mind my saying it in his face. I'm sure he did too. But we also, we want to pay a tribute to your life because you have lived that life, which essentially our foundation essentially is trying to essentially perpetuate, to encourage, and to invest in by our own actions. And while they are pale comparison to what you've done, our board essentially has unanimously approved a special award for you in terms of ethics and civic responsibility. And it is my pleasure to present to you one of our awards for ethics and civic responsibility and the tie, which has come to symbolize our foundation and its work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Well, a wonderful day. Thank you all for coming. If the color guard will come forward, if you will stand for them, we will hold a retreat and you may return to whence you came. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope you'll be here the next time we do this. Thank you and bless you. Appreciate all you do to make our community such a good place to live.